series that we run through this year called Rethinking Work. And it's about time. We started rethinking work before the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely accelerated a lot of what those trends that we knew about work, and now they're becoming the today of how work is being done. We kind of did an acceleration loop on coming into the future of work. And the topic of AI, recruitment and accountability, is probably at the top of our list. And I am more than happy to share this webinar with today with our own NYU expert, Mona Sloan, who is a resident AI researcher and professor of research at NYU. The next slide, please. Mona is going to take us on a little bit of a journey of what she is researching, what she's writing about, and why these topics are so important for us to discuss. Mona, without further ado, I want to give this mic to you. And just as a matter of the webinar protocol, we're going to have Mona present to us for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then I would love you to put your questions and comments in the chat, and I will be moderating the discussion, which will be also a very, very important part of this conversation. So on this note, Mona, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Anna and team. It's an absolute delight to be here. And I should also say that we were actually introduced by the commissioner of the EEOC, Keith Sonderling, just to give you an idea of how vast NYU's network is, and couldn't be thrilled more to actually be connected and work together, since our research agendas and interests are very much aligned. Anna already introduced me a little bit, just to give you a little bit more granularity here, which will also kind of serve as a backdrop for understanding what I'll be talking about today. I am a sociologist. I am a qualitative researcher, and I study essentially the impact of design, specifically AI design, on the social world. I'm at the Tandon School of Engineering, where I'm a research assistant professor, and I am also a senior research scientist with the Center for Responsible AI. I also direct a program at our wonderful Tisch School of the Arts, which looks at the intersection of technology, equity, and the climate emergency, which is, I think, a topic that we have to always have on the table these days. And I am also a fellow with the Institute for Public Knowledge here at NYU, where I run a public speaker series called Co-opting AI. And my next one is actually on recruiting. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as I close the call. Now, I'm a sociologist, which means that my point of departure is the notion that AI has come to really express and constitute social relations, and it has become integral to how we organize society. Now, the systems that we call AI really are everywhere today, whether we are aware of it or not. So when we think about, ChatGPT being the new groundbreaking thing, we have to acknowledge that these kind of technologies have been around for a long while. And you can think about this in various ways. We have the autocorrect in our phone, or the fill-in feature in things such as Google Docs. We have content recommendation systems that show us posts that we are most likely to engage with, or products that we are most likely to purchase on shopping sites. Navigation apps are AI-driven. We have voice assistants such as Siri or Alexa. So we're all avid AI users. And as such, AI systems are not just integral to how we interact with the social world as individuals or members of communities, but they are also deeply embedded into how the professions are forming and how professional practices are unfolding. So, for example, in the financial sector, we have high frequency algorithmic trading, which is using automated and pre-programmed trading instructions that are based on price, for example, on timing and on volume. And this has really changed the trade floor, as it were. We have algorithmic risk assessment systems that, for example, automatically assess loan applications and have truly changed how loan officers think about and assess creditworthiness of clients and how they make credit decisions. This is also the same in the insurance industry, which also uses natural language processing systems, which, for example, analyze large amount of data to assess not just creditworthiness, but automatically detect fraud. By the way, these are systems that are also used by our public agencies increasingly. So they actually change how we interface with government. And there are many more. The marketing industry, of course, and so on. AI has also facilitated quantum leaps in biological research. For example, it has vastly improved the ability to accurately predict protein structures. There was a huge kind of story and news that came in last year through a new AI that DeepMind, which is Google's health arm, put out on the market. It can also help us with climate emergency issues, such as efficiency in the electric grid and so on. I could go on forever. So you see, AI actually is social infrastructure. But the big question that we always have to ask, what really is AI? And the jury kind of is still out on that, and it probably will be for a long while. There is no agreed upon definition for AI. Some say that it's just, glorified statistics, as you can see here in this neat little comic strip that I like to show, but we have some technical distinctions that are actually useful even for lay people. So for example, we can distinguish between rule-based and learning-based AI, which the latter includes deep learning based on artificial neural networks, which mimics the way in which the human brain learns. Now, the former, rule-based, is given a set of rules. For example, chess rules. Think about back in the day, Deep Blue, the computer that beat Garry Kasparov. So you give a system a set of rules, and it learns how to play best within this kind of box of a number of set rules. So, for example, on the stock market via algorithmic trading, as I just have mentioned, various sets of rules that underpin algorithmic trading decisions. The latter, however, the learning-based AI, is not given instructions, and it detects patterns by itself and makes decisions based on these patterns. For example, whether a photo shows a cat or a dog. GPT chat, which Anna warned me will be focus of our discussion, or at least feature in our discussion later, is also based on that technique. So, as I said, many say that AI is just advanced statistics, and it's actually harmful to depict it in any other way. But others also have argued that advances in data collection, in computational capacity, and the many new methods that we have right now in the field of AI make AI its own league. So it's distinctly different from statistics. Now, I like to always come back to the social significance and try to combine it with technical definitions. And I really appreciate Jabbar Bhatti's definition here, which says that artificial intelligence essentially is a class of computer programs that are designed to solve problems, and that problem solving requires things such as inferential reasoning and decision-making based on incomplete or uncertain information. Think about the learning technique on classification, optimization, and perception. And so Chakrabarti is both a computer scientist and a legal practitioner by training. And I do appreciate this definition because it actually underscores the focus and the impact on social situations, and very clearly says, well, the social function of AI is problem solving and decision making. We're not designing AI just for the heck of it. We're designing AI ultimately because we wanted to do certain things. That says, because AI typically gets deployed in decision-making processes, whether it makes decisions on its own, automatically rejects a loan application or credit card application, or it supports human decision-making, makes a suggestion, human makes the decision. I actually prefer the term automated decision systems over artificial intelligence. So automated decision systems, or ADS, because that term signals the social nature of AI. There was a little kind of side notes, because in this talk, I'm going to stick to the term AI, but I wanted to kind of bridge that to the social significance of AI and kind of prompt us a little bit to consider the term social decision systems. And you will later see when I talk about recruiters and the use of AI in recruiting, why that decision-making function is so important, and why AI actually distracts us from that a little bit. Now, essentially, AI-driven prediction, so essentially analysis of big data, defining patterns, using that as a basis for predicting what will happen in the future as a basis for decision making, that can occur in high stakes and in low stakes situations. And low stakes situations means that when an AI system makes a mistake, or when an AI system sort of systematically makes mistakes, which we can call biased or discriminatory, the consequences of that are relatively not severe. They don't threaten life, for example. So I like to use this comic that I created in collaboration with data science student, PhD student Fala Arif Khan, and professor of data science here at NYU, Julia Stojanovic, in this comic called Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Decides, which is a comic about AI ethics. It is part of a public education course on AI called We Are AI, publicly accessible with comics and videos and so on. I like to use this comic because it neatly illustrates what we mean by low stakes situations. So, for example, a low stakes situation could be that the product recommendation system on your preferred shopping site recommends you a pair of sneakers that you think you like, it's shipped to you, and then you don't like. You are not going to die from that. Or say Spotify's AI misinterprets your taste and curates a playlist for you that you really don't like. Low stakes, harm not significant. However, we also have, of course, because of the nature of AI as social infrastructure, increasingly high stakes situations in which AI gets deployed. And these can lead to what we call AI harms. And we can use a famed example here, autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles are equipped with a whole panoply of sensors, some of which are AI driven because they use computer vision technology to automatically detect and classify objects. So that technology may not be able to recognize a pedestrian pushing instead of riding a bike across a road, and could potentially end up striking that pedestrian because it can't quite make sense of the fact that there is a bike, but there's nobody on the bike, and the bike is very slow and not at typical speed. So This actually happened in 2018 in Phoenix when Elaine Hertzberg was fatally hit by an Uber self-driving car whose driver at the time was watching the show The Voice. And so we could say, well, hang on, humans actually do cause road accidents too, a lot. So in the US, that's a big problem, actually. In 2022, the US recorded 117.4 deaths by road accident per 1 million inhabitants. This is really, really high and a lot compared to other countries such as Germany, which has a 32.7, or Japan, which is at 27.1, or Canada, which is at 46.9. So this rate is actually the highest among all OECD countries. So we could actually say, well, wouldn't it be better to have like one, an occasional death on the road if we can bring that number down generally, just by replacing human drivers with artificial agents? Well, the problem is that we kind of leave out that the harms that can flow from AI systems are sometimes cluster in certain communities, and that these harms are unevenly distributed across society. In other words, there is, for example, research out there by Morgenstern and others, for example, that has shown that people with darker skin tones are less likely to be detected by some of the computer vision technology that is embedded into some of the sensors in autonomous vehicles. You could, if you were, for example, a journalist, say, well, this translates into people with darker skin tones being more likely to be fatally struck by an autonomous vehicle. So this is about the systematic and unevenly distributed harms that can flow from AI systems. There are different kinds of harms that we know of in the context of AI systems. We have allocative harms, which are caused when a system can withhold a certain group an opportunity or a resource. So think about, for example, women having a harder time securing loans, for example, even when they have higher credit scores, or we have representational harms that can occur when systems reinforce subordination of some groups along the lines of identity. So race, class, gender, computer vision, technology that essentially could become just racist is such an example. Now, let's get to the kind of focus of today's talk, recruiting. I think we can all agree that recruiting is a high stakes situation, not a low stakes one, because recruiting actually is the gatekeeping of the labor market. Hugely important. And we know that there are many different AI technologies that kind of have created the situation in which AI-driven prediction mediates that access. We can look at that across the hiring funnel. So across sourcing, screening, interviewing, selection, and then also evaluation. HR tech is big on that, and worker surveillance is an increasingly a topic. So AI used in sort of sourcing and screening, which is my focus at the moment. We have, for example, social media or job platforms. LinkedIn Recruiter is a good example. We have chatbots that are used. We have resume parsers. We have rankers. So when recruiters actually search for candidates and they are presented with a ranking of candidates, we have psychometric assessments, we have personality assessments, video interviewing tools that can either be used to kind of ease up the scheduling burden of recruiters when they want to meet candidates, but they can also be used to automatically analyze the material that the candidates produce when they have these quote unquote robot interviews. There's speech and emotion analysis and many, many more. What is important to note is that applicant tracking systems, I'll get back to that in a second, are actually a really important, and again, infrastructural technology to recruiting. Applicant tracking systems are these systems that companies, whether that is recruiting agencies or companies themselves, use to process applications. And they also store candidate data in there. So they have their own little, some of these are not even that little, own little databases or own little LinkedIns. And these systems have been around for a long while, and there are also increasingly have AI elements in them. We know that there is bias in recruiting AI. These are just a bunch of headlines that I've collected over the years. Those range from not being shown job ads for high-paying jobs, for example, in the tech industry, to the famous example of the sexist AI recruiting tool that Amazon had internally developed and then had to scrap, to anti-Black bias in recruiting AI, to bias in interviewing tools, to issues that occur around personality tests, which, by the way, have been around for a long time, but are now being automated through AI. And again, more kind of job ad bias that we see in recruiting. Regulators are, of course, increasingly attentive to that issue. We are seeing more and more regulation, especially on the local level, that is focused on discriminatory AI and kind of working to mitigate the effects that AI can have on citizens' well-being. And because recruiting and hiring and employment AI, so that actually also includes HR tech, is a kind of focal area here of regulators, especially on the local level. So here are just a few regulations that are have come into effect or will come into effect very soon. We have a kind of now famous bill here in New York City, which regulates automated employment decision tools, which are defined as those that are scoring, classifying, or otherwise making recommendations, which essentially assist or even replace decision-making process of an individual in the recruiting process. The bill has a couple of mandates. One of them is a regular bias audit, but it also has a transparency requirement whereby candidates have to be notified if an AI is being used to assess them in the application process. Given that, for example, platforms such as LinkedIn are, at least in parts, AI-driven, that has very interesting consequences for how the technological setup is set up and designed, and how this kind of transparency can actually be achieved. We have the Illinois Artificial Intelligence Video Interview Act, which came into effect 3 years ago, which focuses on all technology that uses video interviews and automated analysis of such. And also here, candidates have to be notified. We also have, on the other side of the pond, the EU AI Act, which is expected to come into effect sometime this year, where this is an omnibus regulation, which has regulates all of the EU's member states' AI markets and the deployment of AI technologies. So that is quite significant. There are over 500 million people who are in the EU, obviously huge economic force. So this will have a big signaling effect. And the EU AI Act deploys a risk framework to AI regulation and has various risk tiers for AI, and actually does classify AI in hiring and recruiting as high risk, which means there are certain things that have to be done after this comes into effect when it comes to AI in hiring and recruiting. For example, risk assessment, pre-market deployment, regular bias audits, and so on. And then we also have the Justice Department and our very own EEOC, who did put out a primer in 2022, so last year, that warned against or warned off disability discrimination in recruiting AI. So some of the, especially in the assessment phase, sort of ableist concepts that are operationalized in these systems and could systematically disadvantage people with disabilities. I'm now going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the research that I have done and am doing in this context. So the first that I want to talk about is really responding directly to some of the regulatory sentiments and requirements that we're seeing in the hiring AI space. And this one is focused on auditing AI. And again, the New York City hiring bill here is really, push the boat out on that a little bit. This is a paper I wrote in collaboration with Emmanuel Moss and Ruman Chowdhury. And this is a paper that essentially says, well, it's not enough to say that we just test the algorithm based on the question, does it work or not? Because if a problematic algorithm works well, and a discriminatory algorithm works well, it still is discriminatory and problematic. So we need a more holistic sort of approach to AI auditing. And this is a concept that we've proposed here. And we said, well, we need to also test the assumptions that underpin the system. So for example, the assumptions, I'm going to use psychometric assessment tool that is on the market, Pymetrics. Pymetrics uses neuroscience games. So how fast can you kind of blow up a virtual balloon or put, little things through holes with different shapes and things like that. They let the most successful employees of a company play that game to produce an average profile of game performance of that group of people, and then let candidates play that game too. And they actually say that this is a way to mitigate bias that can occur through human bias in the recruiting process. And the basic assumption here is, of course, that neuroscience games are a good kind of proxy for job performance and job fit. And there are a bunch of problems related to that. We could even say that there are some eugenicist kind of tendencies here. And for that reason, it is important that we also assess the assumptions. So we produced this framework, which you can see here. So we are actually asking that if you want to do an audit, conduct an audit of a hiring AI system, you should identify which funnel stage this tool sits in, what the goal is, the assessment goal is. So what are you trying to test for? The experience or the skill or ability, or what are you trying to get at? Then you should look at what data is actually being used here. So some, in the Pymetrics example, game performance is the data that is being used. Then what is the function of that system? And what is the assumption that sits at the core of all of this, right? We could also take this outside of hiring and say, well, and take this into sports, right? And say, well, in basketball, for example, the assumption is that tall people are better at basketball. So, it's a kind of at that sort of basic level. And then we suggest that people actually ask, what are the epistemological roots? So where does this knowledge actually come from? And some of these knowledges actually come from pseudoscience or have a eugenist history. So that is a framework that we developed. Then we went and actually operationalized that and ran a stealth audit with an interdisciplinary team consisting of data scientists, psychologists, and journalists, and tested 2 personality assessment tools that are out in the market, Crystal and Humantic, with real data. This was an IRB approved study, so we used data from real candidates and used the assumptions as a a basis, and from there identified key facets from which we assume there is stability across outputs. So for example, this is personality assessment technology. So the basic assumption here is that personality is sufficiently stable that it kind of stays the same regardless when you actually do the test, if it's Monday morning or Friday evening, whether you use your social media data or just your resume as a basis to make that determination, in what format your the data comes in. So this is the schema for that. So we compare the inputs across the facets and then the outputs. And what we found was both systems really show substantial instability. So personality is not stable when we measure it with these systems. And therefore, they cannot be considered a valid testing instrument. So one of our kind of big results was that Crystal frequently came up with different personality scores for the same resume, so same person, depending on whether the data was inputted as PDF or as raw text, which, for example, violates the assumption, again, schema, we come full circle, that personality tests are stable across job irrelevant input variations. If there is variance across job relevant input features, that's different, of course, but this shouldn't affect your personality score. By the way, the score is used as a basis for computing a job fit score also. Now, last bit that I want to share with you is an ongoing study that I'm currently running. I'm interviewing recruiters and talent acquisition managers and sourcers about their use of various AI tools in the market. And my main question is, how do you make sense of all of this stuff? And I am primarily looking at low volume recruiting because I'm mostly interested in tech jobs. I'm not looking at high volume recruiting where AI is deployed to solve a different challenge, which is to kind of cope with large numbers of applications, whereby in low volume recruiting, it's really about finding the most suitable candidate that's also most likely to make a move. So I'm looking here at the top of the funnel at sourcing and screening, and I'm particularly interested in the ways in which AI may shift and reconfigure professional discretion. And so some very straightforward research questions that are driving this inquiry. How is AI embedded into the professional practice of recruiting? We don't actually know a lot about that, which is of course, a research gap, but also knowledge that would be important for regulators. How does this affect discretionary decision making, and specifically the discretionary power of recruiting professionals? And how does recruiting AI potentially contribute to more opacity in the kind of context of recruiting AI? The findings that I'm sharing now are based on 55 semi-structured interviews that I've run thus far. And I said professional recruiters, sourcers, talent acquisition managers are the main target group here. And again, I'm looking at low volume recruiting, where recruiters actively and explicitly make, albeit AI-mediated decisions. So this is not, again, high volume where you have 20,000 people applying for one position and you need a system to cut out, most of them. The kind of first important bit of information I want to relay based on that research is that recruiters use a range of many different AI tools. So there are various AI assemblages that emerge in AI recruiting. There is video recruiting, candidate assessment, various search engines, including Google, and I guess now Bing again, personality assessment. There are applicant tracking systems, as I mentioned earlier, scheduling systems. There is diversity-focused candidate search. There is natural language processing technology to help recruiters craft more inclusive job ads, and so on. And all of these are interconnected and are used in interconnected ways by recruiters. There are a bunch of findings I want to share with you today. The first one is that this assemblage that I just showed you, and these are, were just some example. There are many more AI technologies used in recruiting. This assemblage does not replace or displace professional discretion. So we're not dealing with a total automation kind of scenario that we sometimes hear of, but it really reconfigures it. In recruiting, it changes it, which means it changes it in places that it already existed before. So, for example, the question who to move forward in a screening interview. And this kind of process of reconfiguration of professional discretion is very much related to the degree of opacity that AI systems bring to this whole assemblage by virtue of being black boxes, essentially, whereby recruiters can't see all the entries, they can't see all the fields, they can see all the factors that are behind AI's decision-making. And the third big finding is that the discretion that is exercised with regards or in relation to that opacity. So recruiters constantly kind of grapple with the opacity, are trying to reverse engineer how a system works, why it chose certain candidates over other candidates, how they can kind of manipulate it so that they can actually get the type of person they're really looking for. And so they constantly adjust their interactions in order to retain their professional discretion. Professional discretion is extremely central to the professional identity of low volume recruiters because they are the experts. They're the experts who find people who they then put into the slate, which they then present to their clients, whether that's an internal client or an external client. So they're very kind of vocal about the human nature in their job. And so when they face these kind of situations in which they can't really see or understand why a system recommends certain people, that becomes a problem. They try to, and I'm gonna have my eye on the clock a little bit, so I'm gonna speed this up. One of the strategies that they use in order to retain professional discretion is that they stick to their guns, as it were, and they use Boolean searches, which is a ancient search technique, which they've always used to search across internal databases, which they've always used for LinkedIn Recruiter, where they create search strings based on the job descriptions that then produce the kind of people that they are looking for. So it's kind of where they feel that they succeed or totally fail. So a good string is like a gold mine, and a bad string is really problematic for them. Boolean searches, for those of you who don't know, are simple search logics where you combine and, or, and not to essentially retrieve information from a database. You also are taught that when you write a PhD and you look for things in the library catalog, essentially the underlying idea is that the relationship between things, such as keywords, can either be true or false. And so this is a little explainer here about Boolean searches. So this has given recruiters a lot of power over search for a long time. And they actually do think like computers. So these are real world Boolean strings that were shared with me by one of my informants, who is a technical sourcer, so looking for people in the technical field, which are extremely elaborate, as you can see. She has these ones, for example, which are obviously for data scientists, but then also recruiters increasingly are looking for more quote unquote diverse candidates. And the last Boolean search here is to actually address the certain homogeneity that this recruiter found in her search outcomes, and find more women in data science to recruit and have a more diverse slate. So this is a search string fragment to find women in computing. And the point here is that this thinking like a computer through a Boolean search is really where recruiters think and feel that they can have still some power over who they're finding and suggesting. Now, Boolean searches are different from AI-driven search. No AI is needed for Boolean. And the thing is that increasingly search, including in big platforms such as LinkedIn, is semantic search and not really designed for Boolean search. And so recruiters think that AI-driven databases actively design against Boolean searches, which means they lose agency and transparency and increase opacity in candidate search. So they have to guess a lot. And because of that, recruiters do think that AI is biased and not trustworthy because they can't see what's in there, what goes in the very structured way that they are used to. And they talk about that a lot. So the first one, for example, says, well, AI still is biased. It's not actually solving the bias problem in recruiting. And so they actually also say we're not trusting these systems because we always go back and double check. So the whole narrative that AI is actually making recruiting more efficient is not necessarily accurate for the recruiters themselves. And then there's a big drawback as well for recruiters in that AI, they feel, cannot assess transferable skills. So which means that when they're, for example, assessing they're trying to find people in a market where the market is very tight. There are not a lot of people around. So candidates who don't necessarily have the exactly the needed profile of skills, that means that recruiters look at the resume and check, oh, this is actually, this person doesn't know this, but could quickly pick this up because they have this other skill. And this is something that they find AI can't assess at all. So they go back and double check, which means that AI, that even though we have AI, recruiting remains largely manual, at least in low volume recruiting, which means that human bias is still around. And I'm going to give Anna a little cue here. So we have a sort of evolving relationship, right, between Boolean search, and recruiters think like computers, but kind of like older computers, not the new ones, and the new kind of wave of semantic search that we're seeing here. And ChatGPT is kind of indicative of that shifting nature. And the jury is kind of still out in terms of what systems, large language models, LLMs like ChatGPT will do specifically to professional discretion in recruiting. And I'm going to leave it at that. And thank you for your attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Mona. This was eye-opening to a lot of us. I welcome questions. I see a couple already coming in. And some of them are more specific. Because we do have, Mona, quite a few recruiters here, or people who are doing recruitment. So if you're still looking for the candidates for your research, please contact Mona directly. She's at NYU, and we will send all the information. I hope that this is going to be publicly, obviously the recording, but also the slides. Just before I dive into the specific questions, one point I wanted to make is that how important it is to reframe what kind of technology we're dealing with. I have heard over and over again that calling what we're witnessing and experiencing now artificial intelligence is very misleading, and it kind of takes us to a very different conversation from what it needs to be. And I love that they're reframing it into automated decision systems. I also heard conversations about how it's about really building relationships and understanding how it connects back to society. And that's the difference between the latter generation technology like digital, where it was just a platform for real individuals to connect. Now, I think we have technologies that impact how we build relationships and can reframe our way of thinking about the world, because they're making decisions on our behalf. And obviously, as you mentioned, recruitment has already been in the front lines of this. It's not new technology for recruiters because it's been deployed. So let me just quickly ask the questions from the audience. First of all, Lauren on the call here is saying she'll be happy to talk to you.
Perfect. I'll email you, Lauren.
And there are a few of other students of ours who are in recruiting jobs and working with these systems. I would be really welcoming that continuation. That's why I'm trying to recruit Mona to teach in our program so that we can take that research to the next level. What are your thoughts on AI as candidates can Google ChatGPT toward resumes that better optimize their likelihood to be found in search results?
Very interesting. If I understand this correctly, this is about basically using Google or ChatGPT to write better resumes. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I can just answer that, against the backdrop of my research, which is on low volume recruiting, whereby I hear over and over again, and this has everything to do with retaining that professional discretion and expertise, that recruiters don't think that actually works. And they kind of feel that they still are superior in finding the right people. In other words, they wouldn't, because they generally don't necessarily trust these systems, they wouldn't trust the manipulation of the system either. Now, I don't know, ChatGPT has been is sort of young, so we don't know how that system specifically changes the game. And let's also not forget that LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. So that's all I can say, is that actually it is kind of a part of retaining professional discretion to have the position as a recruiter that they, you can't cheat them easily.
Yeah, the similar question here about, there's been, there have been some reports about taking medical exams or law school bar exams, et cetera, just because a lot of it is pretty predictable, right? I think that's just testing for knowledge rather than generating knowledge. Mm-hmm. And if there's still bias using AI in recruiting, and recruiters need to double check, what is the biggest benefit recruiters get from AI recruitment? That's Jean's question here.
That's a great question. I hear a lot of frustration with certain AI tools that are out there on the market that are sometimes pushed onto individual recruiters because the agency they work for, or the company they work for, bought an expensive license, and so they require the system to be used by their recruiters. Also partially because it keeps tabs on the recruiters as well, right? Let's not forget that there's a kind of worker surveillance going on here as well. I think we have to really ask, what are the specific tasks, and does what kind of automation really makes sense? So anything that, for example, helps with the administrative side of recruiting, scheduling, interviews, getting people onboarded, scheduling meetings, that kind of stuff. That is something that I hear is automation that is appreciated by recruiters. What is also interestingly very much appreciated is very diligent collective database maintenance. Recruiters love their ATS, and they do love that they can take their individual notes to their individual annotations and share that among their team members. They feel that this is a lot more efficient. So any AI that is embedded into ATS and kind of supports these existing professional practices would be appreciated. That's partially from my research and also partially my personal opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's an evolving practice. We're going to find out more and more. I think there's one question that I think will be like sort of a capstone question for us. What is the right gesture for HR professionals, the recruiters, the people who are in assessments and various types of HR roles to take, because of they're oftentimes the customers of these technologies. And to your excellent point, that oftentimes we need to examine assumptions that went into creation of these tools. So what will be a proactive stance that HR professionals could take to mitigate or prevent some of those biases that could be built in, because there could be well-intentioned people who are just not aware of the types of technologies that they are creating?
That is a great question. I think if recruiters are in a position of power whereby they can participate in decision-making processes around what systems are being bought, sometimes that's the case because companies make big investments into these licenses, so they want to make sure that they are actually increasing productivity. There are, three questions that can be asked. One, Anna, you just said, what are the assumptions? What is the system actually trying to do here? And is that something that is scientific, evidence-based, part of already of the professional practice? Is this entirely bogus thing that they're trying to do here? The second thing is that if possible, one should ask, what is the model optimizing for? So is it optimizing for diversity, or is it optimizing for efficiency? What is the goal here? In LinkedIn Recruiter, for example, we sort of know that the one of the assumptions that are in that system and what is being optimized for is interaction between people, so interaction between recruiter and candidate. So likeliness to respond to in-mail is very important. So that's kind of what's being optimized for. And then the last question is around what data was actually being used to train this model here. What are the actual, what data powers the model as you buy it? Because if that is based on a biased data set, you kind of already know that this is not going to give you the kind of diverse recommendations that you probably are looking for. Recruiters are never interested in homogeneous groups. They are diversity hunters for the most part, I find. So that's what I would say.
That's excellent. And this is where I want to make a plug at the very last minute here for our program, because that's exactly, there's no longer room for HR professionals who are not informed about these tools. And you don't need to be designing them, but you have to be at the table providing input and making sure that you know exactly what questions to ask, because we are more than anyone else interested and committed and are responsible for the outcomes of these tools being applied to recruitment and other parts of the process. So Mona, and I know there are a couple more comments. This is the conversation we're going to continue to have. Just to plug, in the summer, we're going to have a conference on Coaching and Technology Summit that we are going to obviously advertise to our community at NYU. I hope Mona will join us as well. And there will be a few other events coming up. Some of them will include the continuing conversation about the role of algorithms and AI, or a better term for it, ADS, in the HR profession. Thank you all so much. You will have the recording of this event as well as access to the slides, and we will definitely provide, as you can see here, connections to Mona. And those of you who can help with the research, jump on board and join the community of HR people who really want to make a difference. Thank you all. Thank you. It was a terrific event. Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.